Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is June 7th, 2018. We are almost halfway through the year of 2018, which is kind of crazy. But we got another great meeting for you here today. But as always, we're going to start off with what this is all about and a little bit of background for folks that might be new to the call or watching these videos for the first time on the YouTube channel. We are part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, and we started these special interest groups to give us an opportunity to focus on some specific areas. We were sort of having this problem, we were a victim of our own success in that we'd have these monthly calls and we just couldn't cover all of the stuff we wanted to do across the CSOM development, the new SharePoint Framework development, and the other kind of areas. And so we broke up into these special interest groups, and this was the first, and now we also have one for the PowerShell and CSOM development. And they really give us a chance to dive a little bit deeper and have a little bit more focused demos around these different areas. And on this one, we very much focus on SharePoint Framework and the client-side, associated client-side development patterns with SharePoint Framework. And then we look as well at the PnP JS libraries and emphasizing, those libraries are emphasizing simple and repeatable and tested designs to make your development life easier and to help you not necessarily focus on exactly how to do things, but very much more on what you want to accomplish. So two links down there at the bottom. We've got aka.ms/SPPnP-community. That will take you to the Microsoft tech community for all things SharePoint. So that's sort of the SharePoint corner of the Microsoft tech community. That is a really great place to ask general questions, how do I questions, that aren't necessarily related specifically to a bug or an issue in the library. And sorry, one second, I'm checking. Nope, my recording is still running. I just got a weird message my recording had failed. So we'll see. But so the community there, great place to ask general questions, get involved and seek some guidance around your architecture ideas or maybe how to pursue different problems. And the second link there, the spdev-docs, will take you to the developer documentation all up for SharePoint. So if you're new to the SharePoint framework, want to get started with that, you'll find some great tutorials and guides on how to get up to speed with SharePoint framework. But as well, if you're doing CSOM development, the managed code development, even on-premises deploying your solution packages, you'll find the guidance and documentation for those things there as well. So do please check out the documentation and do please check out the Microsoft tech community. What are we going to cover on today's call? We'll have, as always, an engineering update from SharePoint Framework. So we will have, we've just released 1.5 of the Yeoman generator, which has some great new features. Vesa is going to talk us through those. We've got the PnP JS client libraries update. We've got an update with live demo on the Office 365 CLI. That was a new release just this week, I believe just this week or very end of last week for the Office 365 CLI. And then demos, we've got Andrew Connell is going to do dynamic data, and that's using the SharePoint Framework 1.5 latest release. And then Velen is going to do a showing how to use the Jest test framework with SharePoint Framework, and that's something we've gotten not a lot, but some good questions on from folks out there in the community on how do I test my SharePoint Framework things. And Velen's going to show a great example of how to do that with Jest. And then we should have some time at the end for Q&A. So look forward to our agenda this week. And now I will hand things over to myself to quickly mention opportunities to participate in the SharePoint framework and the special interest group here. So we really encourage these community demos. So demo a SharePoint framework solution, demo something related to PnP JS, demo those two things together, which is always a nice thing to see. But for me, the demos are one of the most valuable parts of these calls because it lets us, all of us in the community, see what other folks are working on and doing, and it gives us great ideas, things we can do in our own projects, maybe learn some new techniques. So I'd very much encourage you. I know lots of people out there are doing some really awesome things in SharePoint Framework and with client-side development. So if you'd like to share those things, please do reach out to us, reach out to myself, reach out to Vesa about doing a demo, and we'll get you just as soon as we can on the agenda. We can't always get you perhaps like on the next week next instance of the call, but we'll very much get you on as soon as we can, and would encourage you, please do reach out with those demos. They're really awesome to see what folks are doing. You can as well contribute on GitHub, so you can contribute to PnP JS on GitHub. You can contribute questions and feedback to the SP Dev Docs or those repositories on GitHub. You can submit new samples for the SharePoint Framework areas, and would remind folks, please do come onto the call on mute if you don't mind. And then as well, all up on what we're doing with the programs, please, we do welcome the feedback you have and the ideas you have to do what we're doing better. So not just specific to the given libraries or specific to SharePoint Framework, but really about the program. How can we communicate better? How can we do a better job? What can we do to improve our delivery, our documentation, etc.? So really appreciate all that feedback. We can't, as I always say, always act on each piece of feedback immediately, but we do take them to heart, we do listen to that feedback, and we do try and respond as best we can to what's going on. So stepping now, I will hand things over to Vesa for an update on SharePoint Framework. As he takes
Here we go, unmuting myself. Yes, hey, it works. Woohoo, technology. So let's actually talk about the SharePoint Framework and the latest on this side. So my point in here is talk about obviously the 1.5 release, which went live yesterday, or day before yesterday, Tuesday, yes, Tuesday on my time, and then a few other things related on SharePoint Framework. Now, so let's get moving. So one thing what we actually already shared last week, or earlier this week actually, just some numbers from May, because we kind of passed the May month, so some numbers related on SharePoint Community, SharePoint Dev Community from May side. So on YouTube channel, we had 157,000 watch time minutes and views on 27,000. We have 38,000 unique visitors in GitHub, and this is growing quite fast as well. And it's great to see the interest of, or let's say, people finding our SharePoint Framework samples and SharePoint samples in GitHub, which is really, really great. On the docs.microsoft.com, we actually grew again at double-digit numbers. So we're now in 898,000. We're pretty close on hitting the 900,000 or 1 million in the views in the docs.microsoft.com. Which is really great, because that shows that people are finding the new location, and also that the information is hopefully valuable. If something is missing, please let us know, so we're able to address those gaps related on your things. Now, the PnP reusable components, this includes the PnP sites core, PowerShell, PnP JS, and all of that. They were used in 12,000 tenants, so open source community stuff was used in more than 12,000 tenants, and they generated more than, or well, pretty close than 10 billion HTTP requests, which is pretty cool in general. Now, on other topics, just a reminder, there's always new people in these calls. AKMS SP Dev Docs, our official documentation source, where you can find documentation guidance from SharePoint add-ins, SharePoint Framework, our schema reference, feature XML reference, if you're still undoing that stuff, hopefully not, the provisioning references and all of that. So, and we're constantly evolving this documentation based on your input. So please keep the feedback coming. Tell us if something is missing or something isn't sufficient enough. We'll absolutely make sure that we improve the documentation. The second thing related kind of on that one as well is the issue list. So we've been, even in generally in SharePoint engineering, we've been having always every now and then a debate on this issue list, because this is causing obviously a lot of traffic on our side as well. But pretty recently we have agreed completely to keep this this process up and running, because it is super valuable for people who do not have a Premier support call or Premier support. The whole point of this one is that if you run into any random issues in SharePoint Online, you're able to actually reach out directly to the SharePoint engineering. And this is for developer topics. So if you run into a random issue in, let's say, a functionality on the UI, something isn't working properly, please use the tenant admin services for opening up a support case using official channels and right channels. If you use a developer topics, however, an API or something isn't working properly, our official SharePoint Online support will not actually support you, because they do not support developer questions. And that's why this issue list exists. So we're able to report issues, we're able to jump on the issues, and we're trying to triage this actually multiple times in a day, officially we triaged our VSO tasks, which are generated based on this twice a week. Pretty recently, thank you for those who've been reporting this, we were able to identify, as an example, a pretty big issue related on Azure AD application integration, and that was fixed then in a matter of hours. So that was pretty cool. Good example of a successful reporting of the issues. Now, moving on things. SharePoint Framework, every now and then, and still we're getting questions, is this really the model what people are using? Is this really the thing what I should be concentrating on? And the answer is yes. So everything in SharePoint Online, in the modern experiences, or in SharePoint 2019, which goes live pretty soon, or, 2019 on SharePoint Online, is built using SharePoint Framework as well. So we in engineering, we use SharePoint Framework, which should give you a confidence on the fact that we cannot actually stop this program, this model anymore. And these charts are actually showing the adaptation of the third party. So amount of customizations being hosted in SharePoint Online based on usage, on user-based or based on a tenant page. You can actually see that the tenant usage is slightly more exponential than the usage based on a user, and that indicates that there's more people looking into doing development in SharePoint Framework. So using these SharePoint Framework in developer tenants, which are free for you from our developer programs, and then pretty soon we can see typically the reaction, or whenever people are using stuff in the developer tenants, that will eventually generate also traffic on the normal tenants as well. But it is actually, the usage is really off the roof. This is by far the most used customization model in Office 365, which is pretty cool. Now, on other topics, so quickly, and this is a high-level roadmap slide. I'm going to deep dive on the 1.5 and 1.6 of SharePoint Framework in a second, but obviously we released a lot of stuff during spring this year, but what's coming in the summer/fall is the GA for native graph access for SharePoint Framework that is not included in 1.5, that will be hopefully included in 1.6. There will be also the enterprise solutions from SharePoint can be hosted in Microsoft Teams, which is a pretty cool thing. We're working on that one. We will have a dev kitchens and everything else, but hopefully by the time of Ignite, we can actually get stuff available for you for testing and then release that after that one. ISV solutions from Microsoft Teams to SharePoint. That means that whatever you see in the ISV selection in Teams can be actually used in the SharePoint Online side as well, which is pretty cool. Global deployment of SharePoint Framework extensions. This means that you're able to push those extensions to SharePoint sites in your tenant from one centralized location, currently scheduled for 1.6 of the SharePoint Framework. And it is pretty much done, so it should be there as well. I'll come back on that one in a second. Dynamic data in SharePoint Framework components. This is something which AC is going to demonstrate today with the one sample which is available for you, because the dynamic data was available was released to preview as part of SharePoint Framework 1.5. And then SharePoint Framework is in the SharePoint 2019. So SharePoint 2019 has a native modern experiences supported, which is really, really cool. And 2019 will be released to beta or preview during the summertime. So in summer 2018. Now, moving forward, SharePoint 2019, SharePoint Framework 1.5. This was released 2 days ago, so Tuesday, and 1.5 basically had the following capabilities. So first of all, we decoupled the project scaffolding from the package management, which basically means that you're able to also use a Yarn or PnPM if you prefer to do so. Technically, you can absolutely keep on using NPM. I'm using NPM, but there's always those people who actually want to use Yarn or PnPM as an example, and that is now an option starting from 1.5. Now, internally in SharePoint engineering, we actually use PnPM because that's slightly faster based on the structure of what we're using, and it doesn't actually require that much space in the disk or storage within your computer. Again, slightly debatable. It depends on the design. Slightly depends on the solution what you're actually building. Now, the second thing is the support for beta APIs. So all of our beta stuff is now in a separate location. So you have to actually execute this +beta command in command line to be able to provision and scaffold projects and solutions which have the beta options or preview capabilities. Like if you want to use the dynamic data option, you would have to use the +beta switch to get those things available. There's a support for custom generators, so you can actually add additional options to the wizard. You can add additional files and modify output files in the original generator. I'll come back on that one in the following slide. And then there's the dynamic data support, which technically means web part connections, but more than that. So you're able to connect to the contextual data, or you're able to connect the web parts to a SharePoint Framework extensions, which isn't quite working with the release which was shipped right now, but we're working on adding that one when we get closer to the GA. Now, so custom generators, few things on here. So on SharePoint Framework 1.5, we released the custom generator support. We will actually start immediately during this week or next week. We'll start creating this new open source SharePoint PnP extension project, which will be led by Stefan Bauer. I think Stefan is in this call as well. And Alex Tarantev will be helping at least in this one. We're looking into, again, building this kind of a typical virtual team, which will then work together to build a Yeoman extension on top of the out-of-the-box Yeoman, SharePoint Framework Yeoman, which will then provide capabilities and support, for example, for Angular elements, Vue.js, PnP JS, and handlebars, and so on. So moving on this one step at a time. Right now, we're still kind of in the ready to run pretty soon or ready to crawl and start actually building this. And so, but pretty soon you can see some actions and initial versions available in the generator SPFx repo in the PnP organization. Eventually, we will release then an own NPM package on this one, and you install that one, which has a then dependency on out-of-the-box SPFx Yeoman generator, and then you execute this one, this generator, and you're able to select an additional options. You're able to select Angular elements or Vue.js as the framework to be provisioned. So pretty cool. It will require still some work, obviously, because there's nothing really done at this point, but it's heading to the right direction. Now, the one thing what I promised to actually talk about in the Twitter, like 10 minutes before this call, but I created the slides slightly earlier today, was also the current plan for 1.6. So 1.5 went live 2 days ago on Tuesday. 1.6 is planned to go live on the end of July. So not too far, but it's like, what, 1.5 months roughly from now. But what we're planning to do is that 1.7 is then coming out on Ignite. So hopefully we can get this 1.6 out before the Ignite release, and this one then will add additional capabilities, like the tenant-wide deployment of SharePoint Framework extensions will be included on that one. We're looking into doing GA on the graph and third-party API calls, hopefully on this one, and GA for Dialog Framework, which is still in beta as well. It's partly technically also a miss from our side. It should have actually gone GA in 1.5, but officially in our documentation, it's still marked as a beta. So we will absolutely get rid of that in our code as part of the 1.6 release. We'll also pump up the React version to 16. There should be a preview version of the Socket.io capabilities, which again, basically it will make you easier to tie your code in the changes within a list and libraries. SharePoint 2019 support hopefully will be there at that time, and then there's quite a lot of other things which are in the, let's say, in quotes, in the pipeline, but I can't share them at this point yet. But there's a lot of interesting stuff available, hopefully, like I said, by end of July. We can't promise that all of this will be there. It might be that there will be some other significant things as well. And I can't promise you that it's end of July. It might be early August because, well, even you never know if you run into unexpected situations or issues here and there, and those always impact the schedule. But this is the current plan, and and it looks pretty okay. And all of the capabilities are looking well. They already work, and we're already working on making everything polished and ready to be released in July. So. There's a quick question from Kevin. I've missed a lot of the questions probably in our window, but Kevin is asking on the ETA on the Teams web part. I would say right now the target is get the Teams web part integration to preview in Ignite, so 1.7, and then we do not have a GA timeframe at this point because obviously we might hope that the GA and in production support will be by Christmas. But what if we will run into some highly unexpected situation, or your feedback is horrible, or you hate us, and we need to then reschedule or replan the whole thing? That's why we cannot actually give an exact date, because we can't predict the future and your feedback. But we're getting there. We're getting there. Good. We still have 2 demos to go. Luca, quickly on the Giuliano's question, what it means that Socket.io. So we will have a more simplistic way for you to subscribe on Socket.io events in the list and library. So you can basically say, hey, this list, that item, or this list, whenever something is added there, give me an event. And you actually get that happen extremely easily. Technically, you can do that already today. I think Giuliano actually has a great sample on that one, if I remember correctly. But we're trying to make that as simple as possible for other people as well, without the need of a third-party API getting hosted somewhere in Azure. So the whole point is the simplification of all of the needed plumbing. Good. Yes, Patrick, you're stealing the thing. You are? Yes, you are. Cool. Take it away.
I am. Quick update then on the PnP JS client-side libraries. We did announce last week on Tuesday the @PnP SP-taxonomy. Really invite folks to give that a try, download that, and check it out. It gives you a fluent way to access managed metadata in SharePoint. It has no dependencies outside of the PnP JS libraries, so you don't need to include the SP.taxonomy or any of that stuff. Do please check that out. Give us some feedback. I think it's a great addition to what we're doing, and I'm excited to have gotten it finally released. I kind of was teasing it for a little bit. And we will have a full demo of that on the community call, which is next Tuesday, the monthly PnP community call. So you'll be able to see that in action, and we'll talk through that a little bit on that call. CDN JS support is still in the works. I feel like I've been saying that for months because I have at this point, but still waiting on those folks to get things updated or get things merged. They're just really overloaded, so no disrespect to them, but just waiting on that at that point. And I have updated our pull requests there to include the new libraries, so the SP taxonomy and the SP client SVC, so they'll get into the CDN JS once that stuff gets merged. We do have weekly beta releases on Fridays. This Friday is going to be a major release, so you'll have version 1.1.1 will get released this Friday, and that will include some fixes, but not a whole ton of stuff since we just did a big release last Tuesday, but we'll have some good stuff in there. And then do check the changelog. We're committed to keeping that updated regularly with each release and as we publish the betas. So that's going to have the latest of what's gotten added to the library. So big reminder, PnP JS, the last version of that is in July, so it is time. If you have not migrated, it is time to start migrating to the PnP JS libraries. It's not a big deal. We do have a transition guide and a short video to help you there. If people have questions, please just post those as issues. We're very willing to help, but it is time to start migrating. So after July, if you have issues with PnP JS, we are not going to fix them. We're essentially going to leave that library in place as is, so it won't break any of your existing projects. You'll still be able to run and install and work on your existing code, but we'll no longer be enhancing or updating or maintaining PnP JS actively after July. So we've been warning that for months, so a little bit firmer warning here today. It's time to start migrating, so do think about that. Do start looking at moving your projects. We worked hard to make that not a huge effort on your part, so hopefully that'll be fairly smooth for folks looking to migrate. And again, if you have issues transitioning, please let us know. We definitely want to help. We definitely want to smooth that out as much as we can. Couple links down there at the bottom, pnp.github.io/pnpjs gets you the docs for the PnP JS libraries. That's a great place to start. We've got guides on getting started with each of the various components, how to get things installed, and how to use them once you've got them installed. As always, if you have questions or you find stuff missing in the docs, please do let us know so we can get that updated, which benefits everybody. The hashtag PnPJS on Twitter. You can always follow me on Twitter at MediocreBowler. I don't post a ton of stuff, so you won't get a lot of spam from me, but that is how you will hear about the updates and releases on the PnP JS libraries. So that's definitely a great way to stay up to date on when things update on our side. So stepping up, Office 365 CLI updates. New version released this week, 1.3, with support for groupifying sites, managing and apply themes, managing files and folders, sending email on behalf of the current user, and managing Azure AD group settings, as well as simplified deployment for SharePoint solution packages. So some really outstanding additions to the Office 365 CLI, which keeps getting better and better with each release. This is also a great opportunity if you'd like to join in and contribute on a project. The Office 365 CLI is a great way to do that. It's got a lot of issues in the issues list. Waldeck has done a great job of putting those in there, and each one is fairly atomic. Like, so if you want to add a command, you don't have a ton of extra work to do. You can focus on adding that one command and getting that working. So it's a great way to get involved and maybe do your first pull request with Office 365 CLI. You can always install the latest beta. Actually, I'm sorry, that's a typo. So to install the latest version, npm install -g. The G makes it global so that we can so you can run it as a CLI command. And then you can always find more information at aka.ms/Office365 CLI. Couple of things down there at the bottom right corner, hashtag Office 365 CLI on Twitter. There's a Gitter channel as well if you have questions, and then that same link to the docs for more information. I want to bounce back real quick just to answer Andy's question. When is support going away for SPPnP JS? Next month, July 2018, will be the final release for SPPnP JS. So
Patrick,
yes.
Patrick, sorry, I need to jump on that one because what does the support actually mean? It is an open source library, so community supported, but what it means in the Patrick language is that Patrick is not going to actually give support for that one, right, Patrick?
Yes, we're not deleting it out of GitHub or anything. It's not disappearing, but
Yes.
it is. It's just not something I'm going to focus on anymore. So if you report issues and wonder why nobody's responding, that is why. I'll tell you, it's been a big challenge to try and maintain the two libraries in parallel for 6 months. I think it was the right thing to do, but I'm excited to only maintain one library, let's say.
Yeah. And luckily, there's others than you also doing this work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got
so.
a bunch of folks helping out. We get a bunch of support from folks and pull requests, and really appreciate everybody that jumps in and helps out there. So it's not just me, but on behalf of everybody, I think we're all excited about maintaining a single library. So, no update on the reusable controls this week, and so we'll go right into the demos. And Andrew, if you are ready, AC.
I'm here. So I just shared my screen, so let me know if you can see it. It's going to be iTerm and, well, Mac.
A what?
It's a Mac. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes,
oh.
I've got it on my end.
All right. So I sacrificed to the Skype for Business demo god, so let's hope that everything should be okay today. All right, so first, thanks for giving me the opportunity to show this. This is, I'm going to do my best Waldeck impersonation today because this is really Waldeck's sample, but I'm filling in for him as he couldn't be here today. First off, so I'm going to explain kind of what dynamic data is real briefly. I'm going to show you a working sample of it, and then I'm going to walk through the code a little bit here. And all this code you'll be able to grab. I'll show you where you can grab that in just a bit. So first, what dynamic data is all about is it gives you the ability to have one component on the page that acts as a publisher. It's going to publish notifications that things within it have changed. That goes up to the SharePoint Framework, and the SharePoint Framework can then notify any other component that is on the page and that wants to be notified when those things change. Those are our consumers. So if you are a traditional or longtime SharePoint developer and you've done the web part connections. It's a very similar concept to that. I like to think of it as almost a client-side service bus, but without passing data back and forth, just passing notifications that things changed. So in order to use this today, when you go to create your project, you're going to need to add in this plus beta on the Yeoman generator. And what that's going to do is that when that creates your project, it's going to include all of the different libraries that have the beta features available to us in for the SharePoint framework to us. So that's one of the new changes that Vesta just talked about with respect to the SharePoint Framework 1.5 update. So let me show you first how this works, and ignore this whole licensing thing up here. We're developers, we don't care about the licensing stuff right now. So this is what I've got. I've got 3 web parts that are on the page, and what you have is over here. I have a list on this site called events, and this web part is pulling from the web part here on the left that says upcoming events. This is pulling from those different from that SharePoint list called events. Now over here on the event details, one of the things we did with this is once I added this, what we want this one to do is I want him to connect to a specific data source. So I've got a couple different options here. So the page context of the events, I've set it up so I can subscribe to things that happen on events. And the property that I'm interested in is the event property. And that's going to be a property that is being defined by this web part on the left, so that when I change the selection of one of these items, it will notify, SharePoint Framework will notify the event details web part. The event details web part will then reach over into the events web part and say, give me the event property that you expose, and then it'll show that detail over here. I've got another web part a little bit farther down here for a map, and he works basically the same way. It's just that he's got a Bing API key that's been set, and his property is going to be bound to the location property over here on that other web part. So as you see, when I scroll back and I select an option here for, like, say, the Tampa Home Show, I see the details from that item, and I can see, kind of scrolling, going back and forth there, I can see the web part, the map for that as well. I select a different one, you can see the data changing, again, down here, clearly not in Tampa anymore. We're now in, where does that say? We're now in San Diego. And then switch over to San Francisco and see them in San Francisco. And sure enough, there's San Francisco and any streets that anybody might recognize. Howard Street, I guess. Fremont, there you go. So there's Fremont Street and Folsom. All right, so how does this whole thing work? There's a bunch of code in this sample here, but it's actually pretty simple. So like I said, we've got, I created this, or this is created using the plus beta flag argument on the Yeoman generator. So it's got 3 web parts inside of it. This data folder is just a collection of a bunch of different interfaces that we're going to end up using. But I got 3 different web parts. So I have my events one, which is the one that you saw that was on the left. So if I look at this web part here, let's come down here and look at the web part. And I'll show you the interesting stuff with this. So it's a standard web part, so there's nothing really fancy about this guy. But right here you can see where I'm importing in a dynamic data controller interface and a dynamic data property definition interface. And then on the web part itself, I'm implementing the controller. Now you don't have to do this on the web part itself, and in fact I would probably recommend that you don't use a separate class to do this. But this is just a demo to make it easy to understand how this stuff works. What this basically does is, by implementing this dynamic data controller, I need to override a couple different methods, things like, or implement a couple different methods. So for example, I need to implement this get property value is one that I'm going to need to end up implementing. Now another thing that it's got a little bit farther down is right here on the onInit method. I'm going to set this guy up, and what I'm doing by setting him up is I'm simply saying, the part that's interesting here for dynamic data is I'm using on the current context a new object or new member called Dynamic Data Source Manager. And I'm saying initialize the source for a provider of data on the page. And I'm passing in this web part because this web part implements this dynamic data controller. So if I did this in a separate class, I'd want to pass in an instance of that class. So how does this work? Well, once I've done that, if I come down here to my render method, what you'll see is I'm adding in a React component to the page. And the interesting part about this is that it has a method that's being exposed called onEventSelected. So let me just show you inside that web part what it does is down here in the rendering for it. See down here, so here's my render method on my event web part. Down here on the, where it's actually showing the list view of all of the different events, I'm simply saying when the selection changes, I want you to bind that to this method called getSelection. So if I scroll back up to find getSelection, right here, you can see that what this one is going to do, getSelection, is I'm simply going to be calling the handler of anybody that's bound to this. I'm going to call the onEventSelected method. So that was defined in my properties for my React component. Okay. So if I go back to the web part itself, which is right here, you can see that I've said that when that method gets raised, so when someone selects an event, call eventSelected. So if I look at eventSelected, what is that going to do? That is right up here. So eventSelected is going to get passed in the event. I'm going to grab the event that was selected and keep a record of which one that is. And then I'm going to notify all the subscribers that two properties just changed that I exposed. I'm going to notify them that the event property and the location property just got changed. Now what that's going to do is that you saw in the example I did a minute ago, that's going to notify the event details web part, and it's going to notify the map web part that this property changed and that this property changed. So how do we consume that information? Well, if I come over here and I look at my event details web part, you see this one is also just a standard web part. There's nothing special with this one. There's no special implementation for an interface or anything. But if I come down a little bit farther inside the render method, and there's a lot of stuff going on in this render method, but I'm just going to highlight the stuff that's important here. The render method, what it's going to do is we don't want to show data coming from a consumer when things are clicked until this thing has really been configured. So there's just some configuration stuff that has to be done. But what you see here in the configuration is I'm saying for dynamic data, I'm saying register when a property changes, let me know based on the source ID, and the source ID is the thing that I'm consuming from, and I want to be notified about the property ID. So the way I got both of these options is that when we did an edit on our web part, I had the data source, and I had the property that I want to be notified on. So that's just standard web part stuff of letting me pick which those things I want to be notified on. So it's a little bit farther down in the code, but there's nothing special with dynamic data there. It's just setting a certain property on the web part itself. So let me know when this provider says that this property has changed, and then the callback that I want to do is the render method. So the render method is going to get called again when I select a specific event. That's going to skip through all of this. It's going to skip through the need configuration. Then it's going to come down here and it's going to say, oh, if we don't need any configuration, which means that we've been configured, we're all loaded, everything's good to go. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's go get this. Now we've been called again for when the data has been changed. So I'm going to go back to my context, talk to the SharePoint framework and say, when on this dynamic data provider, I'm going to try to get the source that was specified. And if I got the source, as you see right here, if you get the source, then I'm going to go get a property value called property ID. Okay? Now, assuming I get it, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Assuming I get it, we come down here a little bit farther, and I'm simply going to bind that event to my event details component. And the event details component, if I just scroll down through, all of this stuff is just configuration stuff. So if I scroll down here to the bottom, it's simply going to display the details of the event that was passed in. So let me jump back one more time. And I said, well, right here is the line I want to call out for a second. So I got a reference to the source, and then I'm going to call this get property value. This get property value event here, or this method, this is being defined on my source. My source, if you recall, was my event web part. So if I come back over to my event web part, he should have a method called get property value. And with that, it's going to say, what property do you want? If you want the event, I just give it the selected event. If you want the location, then I'm going to figure out what the location is for this. I'm going to figure out, base that on passing an object that comes back. So if an event was actually selected, go pass back a JSON object that has a city property and an address property, and that's it. Okay? So really straightforward. You create your the map object work, or the map web part works the exact same way. It just subscribes to the location property and displays the Bing map control. If you want to take a look at this sample, what I would recommend you do is head over to the SharePoint organization in GitHub, go to the SPFx web parts, you go into the samples, and there is a React events dynamic data. You scroll down here and it tells you how to get it up and running. The one thing that I'll just mention that's not here in this list is it does talk about the fact that you need to deploy it to an app catalog in your tenant. This isn't going to run local because part of the provisioning process of the component, it creates the list and adds those 3 events inside of it. So if you try to run this in your local workbench, you're just going to get a bunch of spinning, like you can't show any data and it looks like things are broken. That's not the case. It's just that it's expecting data to be in a list, and this sample provisions the list for you when you create it. So everything is all set. It talks about how to set it up and all that. So with that, I haven't been watching the, oh, and one more thing, actually. Let me find, if you go to the, let's see, go to SP Dev Docs, and if you go to, I'm sorry, let me jump back over to the Dev Docs. If I look at the release notes really quick, and intro to dynamic data. So there's a page here inside of the table of contents. If you look under the SharePoint Framework documentation, under guidance, connecting components, this is going to walk you through a detailed example of all the stuff that I'm talking about right here. And I can see Vesta's posted this link as well as the one to the actual sample in there as well. So that's everything that I had to share. Thanks for everybody taking a look at this. And I'll jump over and let Velen do his awesome Jest demo, and I'll also answer any questions that came up in the chat for this.
Quick, thanks AC for that one. And Velin, is the audio fine?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Cool. Yeah, all good. So you can actually steal the presentation. While you're doing that, just to answer Gautam's question, will this work between an extension and web part? Answer is yes, except right now, no. So slightly complicated. The intention is that the dynamic data works absolutely between extensions and web part and extension. It doesn't really matter what the component is. Right now, there are known API issues related on that one, but we are in preview, so that's the reason why we shifted together with web part to web part communications. It will work together with extensions. No, exactly. The AC's answer is pretty much what it will do. But Velin is going to talk about the testing. So yep. Velin, take it away.
Hello everyone, my name is Velin Kirgiev. I'm a SharePoint developer, and today we're going to talk about unit tests. With the PnP community samples, we recently created a sample here, and it's called React Jest testing. And it's a basically setup for you to start doing unit tests with the Jest testing framework. It has React here, and then the Jest is a product from Facebook, so it makes it a perfect fit to React, but it's not tied to React only. So you can use that Jest testing framework with vanilla JavaScript, Angular, or whatever you like. But basically, the sample is something like a starter kit for you, so you can have a look at what's there. And I'll jump right to the demo. And this is the business need here. So the business need is a web part where we have a PnP ice cream shop, and we order ice cream here. And if I select something, like I'll just order a vanilla ice cream, and I'll change the quantity here, and you can see how the price changes. So it recalculates something on the back end. If I order something, it will just roll success. I just ordered 6 vanilla ice creams here. So this information comes from SharePoint lists. That's one SharePoint list here with the different ice cream flavors. And there is another list that stores the orders. So there you go, one list here that stores the flavors and another list here to store the orders. I already have 13. If I refresh, I'll get the 4th in here. So it's a working web part, a typical business case, typical business requirement where you have a form, you have some business rules and calculations around that form, and it's a really good thing to unit test that. And how this works. So I'll go through the code really quickly. Just a normal web part here. These are my test suites here. And this is the React component on the left. very quickly going through the code because we don't have time. The React component is using the newest and the coolest PnP JS libraries, so we're pulling information from the lists on when the component loads here. Down below, we have a title, and we render the lists. And at the end, we have a bunch of button handlers. Whenever you select something from the list here, it recalculates the price. If you change the quantity, it recalculates the price. When you hit the buy button, it just creates a new item in a SharePoint list. Nothing really interesting. Why you're not seeing the PnP JS libraries? Because there is an extra abstraction layer here that I've created. And I have my own ice cream provider here, and you can see all my providers on the left where we are actually having the PnP JS provider, and then we're injecting it here. But all the PnP JS code is here. We're using search query to query the lists and pull the flavors. And we are also, whenever you click on that buy button, you're adding new item to another list here. This is the web part. Typical business case, as I've said. Now, we have the tests here separated by different test suites here, but I will just run the tests to show you how it works. So now I'll type npm test, and the test run will start. And see how I run npm test, not gulp test. This is important because we need to run npm test instead of gulp test. Gulp test will fire the out-of-the-box testing framework that's based on Mocha, I guess. But we are using a completely different setup with the Jest testing framework. That's why the command is different here. Down below, you'll see all my test suites executed. And we have that nice green mark here to say that all my tests are passing. Here we have, like, in total 7 test suites, and all 7 passed, and we have in total 20 unit tests across those 7 suites, and they all passed. Down below we have the coverage, and here is my ice cream shop React component that you're seeing here on the left. And you can see the coverage. So the coverage is 100% coverage on statements, branches, functions, and lines. Down below we have tested our providers as well, and some good information is here. You can see that my coverage here is not 100%, and it shows you exactly which lines of your code are not covered by any unit tests. So it's a nice useful information, and you can go there, see what's there, and then try to create a unit test for those lines there. Now, another interesting piece of information is that coverage here. Sure. And as you can see, my npm, the npm process exited with error. Although all my tests passed, still I have an extra quality gates here. And those extra quality gates failed the process because the coverage on the statements, lines, and functions should be 100%. And those quality gates are not met here. So this is an extra, as I said, an extra coverage quality gate that I'll talk about later, how we can configure it and fail based on coverage. Ideally, on a greenfield project, you want to start with 100% coverage and keep it all the time. That's why the sample has 100% coverage, and it fails if it drops below 100%. Now, let's go to the tests and see what is there. I'll just put that down a bit, and I'll go to the first part. Here at the start, we're plugging in just a usual library so we can spin up the test. We have the Jest typing, so we have something, a library called Enzyme that help us be more productive with React, but I won't touch on that. And in this demo, maybe we can do a separate demo. And then we have imports for the component that we are going to test, and then basically this is our React component here. Then we have something called the describe, and this is the start of the test suite. And we have the title of the test suite here. Then we have before each and after each hooks, which you can do some setups before you run the tests, and this is basically a setup before each test. And finally, at the end, we have the tests here. So if I expand one of the tests here, the test starts with it, and you have a description here. Now, for people familiar with Jasmine or Mocha, exactly the same syntax, because basically this is Jasmine under the hood of the Jest testing framework. So if you use that with any kind of a JavaScript projects, the syntax is the same. But here, let's just have a look at our unit test here. So we have an arrange statement here where we will be using a selector h1 to check if our title is correct. If I go back to my web part, I will be checking just the wording for the title here. And I have to find that h1 within my web part, and here is my this is my React component, and I'll try to find that h1 using enzyme helpers, and more specifically, I'll try to find the text for that h1 element. And if that exists, I'll try to compare it with that string and see if I have the correct title. Pretty simple. The only missing piece here is where that React component came from, and it came from the before each setup. So I'm mounting the React component on the before each hook here, and you can see that I'm creating that element. I'm using my import here, a bunch of properties to just create the element, and then I can test it later here. So this is the assertion part, or the expectation part. We will compare the text we found in the component with the string, but here you have a bunch of more helpers. You can see that to be, but if I just type to be, we can see a bunch of helpers here, like to draw, to be greater, to be less. I saw someone somewhere here. You can see all these helpers that you can use to build your unit tests here. So now we'll keep it just to be. Good. Now let's try to execute that once again through the Visual Studio Code, because I've prepared 3 configurations here, 3 Jest configurations, so you can use the debugging capabilities here. And Jest AO will run all the tests, the same I did with npm test there. A Jest watch will watch if you do a change. Just watch all will watch if you do a change somewhere, and it will execute all the tests again. But we don't want to do that, and there is an interesting setup here that says just watch. I'll just run that one because it's really important. If you have, let's say, 1,000 of unit tests, you want to run only the tests that you're changing, or you're building new tests and you want to run just them. And Jest will automatically recognize that you have changed only 1 or 2 files, and it will try to run only those tests here. Let's see how it works. So I'll just run that configuration. It will spin up the debugger and everything through the Visual Studio Code. And I'll try to fail a test here. I'll try to fail that very same test here. I'll just make the title be like one. Okay, almost there. I have to kill that process. Okay, almost there. Good. Now, I'll save that file with my new expectation here. So let's see what's going to happen. It's blazingly fast for me to understand that I did something wrong here. And as you can see, this is the previous log of execution, but this is the actual log. It executed only the test suite that I've changed. And it says that it failed now. It failed on that unit test, and the expectation is that string, but instead we received that string. Pretty straightforward. If you're using that navigation, it will land on that specific line that you can change later and see why it's failing here. Now, we can go further and we can place a breakpoint here. If that information is not enough for you, you can use the debugging capabilities. And I'll change it from 1 to 2 to show you that we have that. It will execute again, and it will immediately hit the breakpoint here. And you can hover on your text, and you can see that it's actually PnP Ice Cream Shop, not Ice Cream Shop 2. And you can use that debugging capabilities, Visual Studio. On the left, you have variables, you have the call stack, everything you need to debug. Like you can hover and see more here, or you can go even hardcore mode and use the debugging console, because we already hit the breakpoint here. And if you know Enzyme, you get nice IntelliSense in here, and you can output the React component and see some more details. But I can find my H1 here, and I can see that it's actually PnP Ice Cream Shop, not Shop 2. So plenty of options for debugging that will increase your productivity. And as I've said, maybe the most important thing for me is executing only the code that you've changed on the fly, so you don't need to run all the tests or wait gulp compilation or something else. At least that might be time consuming. Now, how this is set up. I've prepared few parts of unit tests here, but we won't have time to cover all these. Maybe Vesa or Patrick, we can cover those on a separate meeting and go through all these tests. But for now, I'll just say that the tests are here, and you can have a look. The sample is uploaded to the PnP samples, and you can see how you can use spies, mocks, stubs. You can see how you can even stub the newest PnP JS libraries. So might be something that is useful, because we use the new PnP JS heavily, and we need to do things like that. Now on the setup, how you set up the Jest, and this will be my last thing on the talk. The dependencies here in the packages JSON file, you can find only the PnP libraries or the PnP packages here. Down below, you have all the Jest packages here, and this is a must-have if you want to run Jest tests. And I've included those helper libraries to improve the performance, not the performance, but productivity as well, but we don't have time to cover them. So what you need for Jest is Jest types, the Jest library itself, TS Jest, so you can work with TypeScript, identity object proxy, so you can fake that SAS compilation. Then you have React Test Runner that is required by Jest. These are the packages. And then the Jest configuration itself comes right after the packages. We have the Jest section here, and you can see that the Jest will try to use those extensions to run the tests against. Because I'm using TypeScript, I don't even need the JavaScript extension here, but it's here for your own for your information. Then that's important. The source mapping, that's why we use that TS-Jest package here, because the source mapping won't be correct if you don't put it here in your configuration. Then we have a test match here. You can see that all my tests are .test. So it knows where to find the tests and run them. Later on, we have a coverage reports, and the output directory for those coverage reports is /jest. So I have a folder here that outputs a bunch of standard coverage and summary reports, and this is really useful when you have to report something, or when you have to stick in a dashboard in your VSTS tool or in Jenkins to report coverage or summaries on those tests. So you have all these reports generated for you here. And finally is the coverage threshold that I was talking about. So you can control the threshold here, and it will fail the Node.js process with error or with success based on those thresholds here. So if you put 100% coverage on branches, functions, lines, and statements, it will fail if you're not within that threshold. This is the whole setup. It's pretty easy to use and set up and give it a try. And maybe we can do a separate session for the different types of tests here we've made. I think that's it, Vesa.
Cool. Or Patrick, can you close up on the slide? So now thank you, Velling. Really great stuff. And let's actually follow up on on those additional demos and coverage on this one, because the unit testing is absolutely a vital thing when you're writing an enterprise-ready code. So some people value these kind of stuff. Some people just want to have cool-looking stuff. So, but let's have another 15 minutes in some of the upcoming SPFx calls as well.
Sure.
But thanks, Velin, for that one. Thanks, AC, for stepping in for Waldek's demo. And like said, well, we can actually paste in those samples one more time in here. So Velin's sample is available over there, and just making sure that where is the dynamic data sample is available in here. We will add these links also on the video recording, which will go live within 24 hours. In this case, in this time, my Skype actually didn't crash, so we should definitely have the recording available on time. Patrick, anybody? Do we have Q&A questions? I can stay additional 5 minutes because we run slightly again out of time if there's any urgent questions.
But as folks are dropping off, I do want to mention our next SPFx JS meeting will be June 21st. That's the day before my birthday if anybody wants to get me anything. So do check us out. We do have the next general SharePoint Dev Special Interest Group will be next Thursday, June 14th. So join us for that as well. Very much want to thank everybody for coming to the meeting. Thanks, AC. Thanks, Velin, for the awesome demos. And I think you're going to see more and more on testing as SharePoint Framework becomes solidified as an enterprise solution. You'll be required as part of many of your projects to have some kind of a solid testing platform. So thanks, everybody. And like I said, Vesa can stick around for a little bit. I can stick around for a little bit if folks have questions. But thanks, as always, to everybody in the community. Have a great rest of your week.